Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Hi, everybody. It's great to have you here today. We have a beautiful day here. What an excellent day to talk about health and wellness, to talk about the health of our brain. And I would like to welcome Chad Lefevre. Hi, Chad.
Hey, Adiel. Thanks for the welcome. Nice to see you again.
Oh, very good to see you. This is going to be an exciting one because, we're going to be talking about the interview that I had, I think, last week or the week before with Dr. Kat Toups. Now, Dr. Toups is a very unique person. She's an MD. She has gone beyond the regular, MD. So many regular MDs, even brilliant and very accomplished ones, have realized that medical school and the medical system sometimes is a little bit limited. It's good to deal with certain things. Yeah. It can save lives. But they went and became what I call functional medicine doctors. So they talk about the whole of the body, the food we eat, how we move. And so these doctors usually are more interesting to me. Now, Kat Toups is an expert in the brain. So she talks about, Alzheimer. She talks about, dementia. She wrote a book about it. And I don't remember the exact name of the book, Chad. I think it's Demystifying Dementia or something like that. You can look it up. Kat Toups, Toups. And she claims that
Dementia Demystified.
Okay, Dementia Demystified. Obviously, the name was a mystery to me, and I was mystified by it. Demystified. So, it's interesting to know that something that we consider a death sentence, something that absolutely can't be tamed or reversed, apparently is being able to be tamed and maybe reversed. So that's an interesting interview. I invited Kat to be one of the 7 experts that I invited for the television show that I did for PBS called Life 201. So Kat was one of the speakers. She has a chapter in the book that we wrote, Life 201, which is actually going on Amazon within a few months here. Very, very useful. And so it was a delight to have her here on the show. And what was your impression?
Yeah, no, it was a fascinating interview. What I really loved about your interview with Dr. Kat Toups was how practical it was. I mean, there were just so many things that you guys were talking about that are just everyday concerns and questions and things that people deal with, such as, fiber and fats and should I eat out? Should I eat in? What types of proteins should I be looking for? You guys covered a lot of ground, so it was very, very interesting. And one last thing I'll say, it's almost like, we have, Adiel, we have like organic food and then non-organic food. This idea of functional medicine versus non-functional medicine, like, shouldn't all medicine be functional and practical and, at some point we can actually do something with it and outside of the world of theory? So I'm happy we're finally getting doctors who are really committed to how do you use medicine to improve your life as opposed to just the sickness industry that we've been used to for so many years.
Right. So that's why the functional medicine doctors, they're still MDs. They still went to medical school. They still, command the mainstream respect by being an MD and having gone through medical school. But of course, many of my doctor friends will be the first one to tell you that in medical school, they have usually one course on nutrition, and that's normally not necessarily even up to date. Yeah. And the emphasis is about prescription. You know, which drugs do you? So the functional medicine doctors are interesting. So she talked right away off the bat. She talked about something that everybody knows, everybody's talking about these days, that the gut really is the root of our immune system. And she was talking about how we can see the health of our gut is critical, of course, and really they call it our second brain. But she began by talking about the importance of fat in our diets. We need fat. The myelin sheaths are made of fat. Cholesterol is actually, I know that for 50 years we ran on the assumptions that fat is bad. Unfortunately, the name fat is also what is used, what you call people who are heavy, you call them fat. So the name is not a nice name, but cholesterol is a precursor to sex and thyroid hormones. So without cholesterol, we will have hormonal defect. So, I mean, we need to be very careful. There used to be, luckily it's not the same now, but there used to be, if your cholesterol is a certain way, you should even take drugs like statins to lower it. Well, we need cholesterol. And of course, there is the good one, you know, the HDL, there is the LDL. But when people just, abstain from fat. I met somebody recently who is an ardent vegan. So far, so good, because you can be a vegan and have lots of fat in avocado, lots of fat in coconut and stuff like this. But in this particular case, she said she avoids all fat and she cooks with water. And indeed, not an old person, but you could see that in a way she looked a little burned, almost like a wood that was burned in fire. I mean, clearly she would be benefiting from some fat. So our brain makes hormones. So even as we age, the brain keeps making sex hormones unless there is a block. And so people with cognitive decline, she also noticed, in addition to what we just said, usually seem to have a high level of mercury.
Yeah. So quick couple comments I want to, and also Adiel, I'm curious about some of your research and some of the things that you've learned over the years, because, in my family, for example, so both my grandfathers died from heart attacks at the age of 52. Both of them. God.
Oh, unbelievable.
And so I have this genetic predisposition. I've been talking with doctors for years about this. Now, admittedly, both my grandfathers, heavy drinkers, smokers, they came from a different time where they weren't, that aware of the body and this. I don't drink very much. I don't smoke, never smoked. Well, I had a cigarette in high school. I don't know if that counts as smoking, but you know what I mean.
Yes, it does. It does. You're doomed.
Okay, all right. I guess I'm toast. But so, and as you know, I'm sort of obsessive compulsive about health and wellness and lifestyle. So my question to you is this. I go to my doctor, actually tomorrow, I have a GP appointment for a physical, and it's all the same thing. They run the blood tests and the panels to look at my cholesterol and all kinds of things. And, I still find that doctors are still hanging on to that old thinking that cholesterol is bad. You have to bring it down. So, but when I listened to your interview with Dr. Toups, it seems like the problem isn't the cholesterol, it's the inflammation. That's the issue. Not the cholesterol, because our brain needs the cholesterol.
We need it. Much of our brain, a good portion of our brain, we need, cholesterol. For me, an eye-opening moment was, as you know, I'm very blessed to have a nutritionist who has spent the past 50 years following the research worldwide and is always a few steps ahead of the mainstream. She talked about vitamin D and the sun 7 years before the media got wind of it. She's always ahead of the curve. And she kind of wants me to take a blood test once a year if possible. And I remember like it was yesterday. I was in my 30s, a healthy young man, and my cholesterol was low. And one day I took a blood test and my total cholesterol was 139. And before she looked at my blood test, I was very happy and proud. I said, "Oh my God, look at me. I'm the picture of health." Do you know what she said? "Your cholesterol is too low. That is a problem. You need to eat more fats. You need to bring it up." That was an eye-opening moment, because all of that happened 30 years ago when everybody was saying cholesterol is evil, you want it as low as you can. So again, she's always ahead of the curve. It shouldn't be too low. By the way, do you know that if you're very stressed, if you go through a period of high stress and you take a blood test, your cholesterol may be higher just because of the stress. So I mean, the whole statin industry. There's a whole thing we can talk about it.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to belittle or negate what mainstream medicine says, but people should really watch out, because we need fat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that, even doctors that I really looked up to for many years, and some of the research like a Dr. Dean Ornish or someone, and there's many others like him who advocate for the low-fat diet, like 10% or less of the diet is fat. And it doesn't seem sustainable to me, just my observation.
Well, I remember, and that again is like 25 years ago, I think Dr. Ornish is here in Marin, or at least was here in Marin County. And years ago, decades ago, there were like two factions. The Dean Ornish 10% of calories from fat faction, and the almost grotesque sounding, what was the name of the guy from New York City?
Was it Atkins?
Atkins.
Yeah.
Atkins. So these two were, at each other's, and they were, and it seemed like, oh my God, the, Ornish thing seems so credible. He's a doctor. He's talking about lots of veggies. And here's Atkins. Okay, God, he's talking about omelets and bacon.
Cheese.
But you know what? Yeah. But you know what? The Atkins model is actually based on everything that came out in the decades since. Was the right model. Yeah, you probably shouldn't eat a lot of bacon and stuff like this, but the idea is we need fat in our diet. In fact, the new fad or fashion or wave, I should say, it's not a fad, is that carbs really are more of the culprit, and sugar. Right. So the first time that I was introduced to the notion that sugar is poison, and again, very lucky for me, I was 36 years old, and I had a girlfriend, and she was very much into health and wellness, and she turned me on to a book called Sugar Blues. You can still get it. To me, and that's more than 30 years ago, that was a real eye-opener. So I am fortunate to have seen that book. Really changed my entire outlook on sugar. Well, of course, the mainstream caught on to all of this, and now sugar is the villain, not so much fat. But I think that the 10% from calories coming from fat, based on everything I heard, based on everything that I have seen, is wrong.
Well, I know it's definitely hard to maintain. I tried it for a while, and I felt the only way I can describe it is almost like I was going out of my mind, like I was confused, like I felt lightheaded, like I was having symptoms of something. And so my body naturally just was inclined to pull back and start incorporating more fats. I don't live by that anymore. I use mainly only avocado and olive oil, and I use it in every meal. So I know I'm getting the healthy amount of fats. And anyway, it made me think of it, because your interview with Dr. Toups covered a lot of these things, and these are such important things, and it can be very confusing for the average person out there who hears so many conflicting things.
By the way, I shouldn't even say that the Ornish diet is wrong. It may be right for certain people. It may be right for certain conditions. He certainly has shown results. I mean, I don't want to dismiss a whole set thinking in one fell swoop. But I believe, based on everything I see, that we do need fat. Coconut oil and coconut in general could be a very good source. But it's interesting that you carry the myth for 50 years and it still persists. It still persists. For example, I even see a super healthy doctor giving an amazing diet and he says, use no fat dairy. No, full fat. No. And plus, let's think logically. When you get 10%, when you get fat is only 10% of your calories in. The other 90% can only be carbs and protein.
Right.
Now, there's only so much protein you can assimilate. And especially if you're female, you don't need that much, but even a male. So let's say 100 grams of protein a day. Not really. You don't need more than that. A lot of people need less. That's 400 calories. That's maybe on a 2,000 calorie per day, which is not a very high calorie diet. It's only 20%.
Right.
That means the other 70% come from carbohydrates.
Right.
And while there's really nothing wrong with it, and it depends on the kind of carbohydrates that it is, there is the great possibility that sugar will be there.
Right.
There's a great possibility that bread will be there. And we'll talk about that in a second based on what Dr. Toups said. So, I mean, right there, where are your calories going to come from?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And the irony of it is a lot of this anti-fat diet that has got into the culture and the thinking was also occurring subsequent to the rise, and Dr. Toups talks about this aspect of it, with the rise in packaged foods. In foods that are, or as she referred to it, dead foods. These are not even foods that have much nutritional value or life in them. And so simultaneous, we've got don't eat fat. Oh, by the way, here's hamburger helper. Here's lean cuisine, right? Lean cuisine, because you shouldn't be eating the fat. But lean cuisine is all artificial food for the most part. And as she mentioned, then you just get all this inflammation that is the result of eating that food.
Well, again, the very unfortunate fate of fat is that fat is also a word that's a derogatory word for an overweight person. I think we should start a petition to change the name of the word fat to maybe Kevin.
Yeah, something else.
So we have protein, a carbohydrate,
and Kevin.
So now it doesn't, invoke, oh my God, I'm fat.
Yeah.
I'm eating fat. It's a bad name. It's a very.
I don't know if I want to think of myself eating Kevin either. Just
Kevin. Oh, well, that's true. That's true. Maybe Mary. Okay, so Chad Toups was also saying that I already mentioned people with high cognitive, declines usually show a high level of mercury. So detoxing is important. So of course, sweating is a natural detoxifier.
Yeah.
Sweating, like, for example, today is a very hot day here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't know the exact temperature. I think it's about 95. So if I go on a hike on the mountain right next to me, I'm pretty likely going to sweat. So that's good. You can sweat when you run on a machine too. But I mean, that's why saunas have been in vogue now so much, because saunas could make you sweat. And of course, if you are using a sauna, you need to make sure that you wipe off the sweat, not let it linger, because it reabsorbs into the skin.
Right.
And people who think that sauna is a great place to be very romantic with another person need to remember that your toxins are mingling with their toxins. So you have to watch out just a little bit and maybe take a shower right after the sauna. She was talking about broccoli. So broccoli extract can help detoxify. She said there are enzymes in broccoli that are natural detoxifiers. They aid in, detoxifying the liver. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. But she was also talking about viruses. So apparently a lot of the mental problems that people have also have to do with viruses that work their way into the system. Almost every living human being have a whole host of viruses living in them.
Yep.
So most of them dormant because the immune system keeps them in check. Now, when you get on in years, the immune system weakens a little bit unless you really follow certain guidelines, and then the viruses can replicate again. So do you say the cytokine storms begin to happen to attack these viruses, but this is also damaging to the brain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was fascinating, the idea that viruses, they're almost like symbiotically integrated and living inside of our systems. Actually, I had read somewhere that if you really step back and try to analyze what actually even is the human body, and you will find out that it's no one singular thing, that it's a combination of bacterias and viruses and symbiotic living organisms on top of the tissue that we normally relate to as us. And there was one philosopher who went so far as to say, show me the human body and I'll show you it doesn't exist. And these are the reasons why. So yeah, it's quite fascinating. And so we have to create an environment where it's, very complex, where all of these natural biotic things, bacteria, viruses, and even our own tissues can coexist and cohabitate naturally. So.
Yeah, so we are really, when we look at each other, we see a lovely human being with intelligence, but really we are just a bunch of bacteria and viruses and 75% water or so. Yeah. And that's all we are.
That's it. A cacophony of virus, bacteria, and water.
Right, exactly. They swim, the viruses, and they go to the pool, So we do need protein, obviously. Yeah. Dr. Toups says if you eat protein, and if you eat animal protein, of course you want to go for the real free range. And we interviewed Beth Greer in this show, and we have to be careful of the designations. Like grass-fed beef is not enough. Mm-hmm. It needs to be grass-fed, grass-finished. Mm-hmm. That's a big distinction, where grass-finished means they don't start feeding it grain to fatten it up in the last months of its life.
Right.
And Chad Toups was saying about a palm of your hand. Of course, that works itself out because your hand is as big as you are, so it kind of works.
Yeah.
She actually was very negative about gluten in general. Now, it used to be that only if you're celiac, which is not a whole lot of people, you should avoid gluten. But now it's coming out more and more from people like Dr. Toups and others, that avoiding gluten in general is not such a bad idea for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason that she emphasized that is she said that gluten is really the most inflammatory thing that we commonly eat all the time. She said, actually, and this was a surprise to me, but she said, originally we had thought that we could create wheat bread with more protein in it and try to get really clever, because people weren't getting enough of different things. So let's find a way to package it in the bread. And instead, all it did is it inflamed the lining of the gut and the stomach. And she said that's what gluten does too, is it destroys the lining of your gut, making it permeable. So then all the food that we're eating, including if there's bacteria in it, it's the barrier between the gut and the blood is no longer there. And so that bacteria and even microscopic particles of food are leaching into the blood. Well, what does that do? Our blood's no longer pure. It's no longer clean. And the body has to activate an immune response. And so now you've got inflammation all throughout the body trying to heal something that should never have been in the blood in the first place. But because our gut is faulty and permeable, we have these other issues now.
Like I said on the TV show, leaky gut leads to a leaky brain, right?
Yeah.
So she said that even today, nowadays, grains are much higher in sugar than they used to be. The glycemic index of wheat is 20% higher than table sugar. And then I asked her about sourdough, because there's the concept that sourdough bread is good. She said it's really no better than any other bread, still made from wheat, even if it's fermented. It has high sugar and causes inflammation as well. So she said, if you want to eat bread, which, by the way, for me has not been a driving desire, but if you do, she said, try grain-free breads. And there are many of those.
Yeah. Yeah, and more they're starting to, get into seed breads, nut breads, other things like that. And then you guys went into this whole area of dialogue that I thought was fascinating around the balance between omega-3 and omega-6. And we've heard a lot about omega-3 over the years, and omega-6 has become something that I've become paying more attention to recently. I used to eat bags of nuts. I went from eating potato chips and snacks like that at night to thinking, okay, well, this is no good for me. I'm going to eat nuts. So I would eat walnuts and pistachios and almonds. And now the omega-6 is a problem, Right.
So again, very luckily for me, I've been with my nutritionist for about 35 years, and she's been telling me that from the get-go. She said, well, when you eat nuts, you need to eat them in moderation because they're very high, in omega-6. Apparently, it's all about the balance between the 3 and the 6. And I think, again, please don't hold me to it. I'm not looking at a book. I'm not Googling this. But I think omega-3 needs to be many times higher for health than omega-6. And in the Western diet, it's the opposite. Omega-6 is much, much, much higher than omega-3. So the nut that has a decent balance between 3 and 6 is the walnut. But even there, you don't want to overdo it. So very luckily for me, I got the tip 35 years ago. I mean, I'm very pleased about that. But we have to keep that in mind. And because the Western diet is so plentiful in omega-6, we need to now make sure that we place omega-3. I believe that supplementing with omega-3 is important, and more specifically, according to my nutritionist, DHA. So you have DHA, and EPA, but apparently the latest thinking is DHA is what you really want to think about. Obviously, it's going to have some EPA. Yeah. But DHA is the dominant thing, and you do want to take quite a bit of that. So, usually they talk about seafood, but of course you have to watch out for mercury.
Yeah.
So, it's a little tricky.
Yeah. I take an evening primrose supplement every day for omega-6, and I also take an omega-3, and it's about 1,200 milligrams, I believe, of DHA in that.
Well, according to her, a guy your size, which is pretty similar to my size, you may need much more of the DHA. But I don't know for sure that I would take an omega-6 supplement, because I think I'm getting enough of it in my diet anyway.
Yeah, it was suggested for skin-related stuff. So, again, trying to find that calculus and balance for my own, situation.
It's very complicated. So, again, she went again to warn us about don't eat meat that comes from feedlot cattle. And that's the thing. When we go out to restaurants, actually, health in many factors became better during the COVID pandemic, because people were at home. They ate more at home, or you have control over what you cook. When we go to a restaurant, even a good restaurant, you don't start asking the waiter, please tell me about the exact oils that your chef is using. You don't know. What about the chicken? Is it free range? Is it truly free? No, you don't know. Some restaurants, very few that are super duper health food restaurants, actually brag about, we have grass-fed steak, or we have free-range chicken, but that's few and far between. So by not going out as much during the pandemic, the health of a lot of people actually got better. For those that didn't get sick, it's almost
it's an irony in a way, yeah. And that was my experience. I actually lost 25 pounds. over the year that I was, with the COVID thing going on. And now I've got the momentum and everything, so I'm wanting to maintain it. We've only got a couple minutes left in this episode, Adiel. Is there anything else you want to highlight on the Cat Toups interview before we move to the next interview that you've got coming up, which is with Dr. James Garrett on the psychology of fear and some other things that you guys are going to probably talk about?
Okay, so she talked about fiber.
Yeah.
So she told the story of there's a tribe in Africa with no chronic disease at all, and they found out that the tribesmen eat 200 grams of fiber a day, where we are advised and strive to get to 50, and most of us don't. Now, obviously, nobody wants to jump to 200 grams a day because that'll yield incredibly poor gastric results for us. But I mean, it was interesting to see that fiber is super important. So here is again something good about vegetable, something good about so fiber. I think for most of us, we don't get enough fiber, and the microbiome diversity relies on fiber. So fiber, that eat many fiber type vegetables. She even said you could supplement for fiber. Again, be careful, because you can. And she was recommending something called True Fiber. But anyway, thinking about fiber is not a bad thing to do. Then the discussion went to intermittent fasting. And she said that intermittent fasting has been very good for ailing brains. So the ketogenesis shifts you from burning sugar to burning fat. This induces autophagy. And autophagy is the process of cleaning the garbage, cleaning the cellular garbage. Remember how bodybuilders used to say, I eat a meal every 3 hours because I don't want to lose muscle. And I wake up in the middle of the night even and eat, a couple of times. Well, it turns out if we are in a constant state of digestion, autophagy doesn't start. So when you do intermittent fasting, let's take the simplest one, the one that most people that I know use, the one that I use, and I think the one that you use, 16-8.
Yeah.
In other words, I eat all my food in a window of 8 hours, and for me, it's typically between 12 and 8, and it gives the body. I think after 12 hours of fasting like this, autophagy can really get going. So if you live on a 16-8, if you do, the intermittent fasting, that is going to really be good for your health. She talks about her patients that even tried the pure keto diet. Now, I personally don't think the keto diet as a pure way to live is what we need to do. We need a modified keto diet. We need to cycle. But she said her patients with, dementia found that their brain, became clearer, that they had more energy. So again, it may be helpful in certain situations, but overall, she mentioned that intermittent fasting is beneficial to our health. She also talked about stuff that is useful for us to know, very simple stuff. A coconut oil is good for us. We already talked about this. Avocado. And try to avoid vegetable oils, which you get a lot. Avoid, that's what she says here. I'm quoting, safflower, sunflower, canola, use organic oils. Eggs, she says, are nearly the perfect protein. And here's another example of how eggs were vilified for decades because they have cholesterol in the yolk.
Yeah.
Well, the yolk is one of the healthiest foods that exist. So these misconceptions can hurt us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just think of the oils that, going back to that for a second, that people are using in their cooking, thinking that, it's fine or whatever. I switched years ago to only using avocado or olive oil mostly, and from time to time, coconut oil, depending on if it's a flavor thing, that I need. But the amount of canola oil that is used in restaurants and that people use in their home because it's cheap. And, but this stuff is just so destructive to our bodies, is so unhealthy.
But the message in the dementia, as she says, is not a death sentence.
Right.
Things can be done about it. People probably want to read her book, maybe go to her website. It was a fascinating interview, and we'll probably talk to her again in the future.
Yeah, I think it was great. Real quick before we break, before our next episode, so you're going to be interviewing James Garrett on the brain. He's a psychologist, and we're going to be talking about, different things about the brain, like fear and how to move through fear and stuff like that. Anything you want to say in parting and in preparation for what is of interest to you, what you're hoping to get out of the interview?
Well, maybe he can help us with the human tendency that we see, all around us and in ourselves also. The tendency to focus on what is negative.
Yeah.
The tendency to not be thankful. Like, let's say 99 things went well for you and one thing went badly. Why is it that we think so much more about the one thing that went badly? And so I hope he talks about things like gratitude, which really only means being thankful for the 99 thing, not focusing only on the negative.
Right.
And in fact, when we interviewed Pandit Dasa, the monk, he talked about the garden with the beautiful flowers, and then the dog made a dew in the corner, and the fly goes straight to the dew, and the honeybee, the bumblebees go to the flower, and said, "Do you want to think like a fly or like a bumblebee?" Yeah,
it was a good metaphor, and it actually reminded me of this. It's like a line that you tell over and over. I know sometimes when we're just chatting. What's that? That Woody Allen quote about, like, it's only when it's nice out that I think of cancer or something like that?
Well, no, it's a story. Yeah, again. Woody Allen, I know he's a very controversial figure. I'm not going to go into that at all. But I'm just going to say the one story that he says, he's always very neurotic, and he always worries. So he talks about it. He says, I always worry that I'm going to get sick. I'm always going to worry that something will happen. I live my life in a constant state of worry. I think about what's going to happen in my personal life. I'm going to be dumped. I'm going to be hated. I'm going to get it. Except sometimes, he says, there's a beautiful day. I'm in the park. The sun is shining. People are playing. The kids are laughing. That's when I think about cancer.
Yeah. It's just a great line to point out, like you were just saying. Why do we always go to the negative, even when everything seems to be working just fine? We got to think of that in one negative thing. So I'm intrigued. I'm looking forward to your interview with James, and I'm sure all of our listeners are as well. And for those of you who are really interested in why maybe you have this proclivity to want to focus on the negative, or you find yourself into complaint, or maybe you're afraid of things, I think this is an interview you're going to want to check out. So
yes. And in the meantime, I hope we keep a balance between our intake of protein, carbohydrate, and Kevin. Got to make sure you get enough Kevin in your life. Right,
okay.
Right. There you go.
Well, Adiel, it was a pleasure again to see you. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you guys on the next episode of the Adiel Gorel Show. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Thanks for joining me today. Click the subscribe button for more video. Got a question or comment? I love questions and comments. Leave yours below. And here's another video you've got to see.